Hi everyone, Ed here from Shades of Vengeance, and thanks for your patience. I was just making sure that everything was working okay. Um, Welcome. Uh, I'm going to go through the Era Survival rulebooks today. I thought it would be good to show everyone what it is that you get in the various books that we're offering on the Era Survival Kickstarter. So I'm going to start with the Core Rulebook, which is the obvious place to start, really. The Core Rulebook offers you absolutely everything that you need to play this game. I've got the hardback version here. There is a paperback version as well, which is also on offer on the Kickstarter. I'm using the hardback just because it's a little more durable, a little more able to take the strain, obviously. That said, the paperbacks are actually really good quality bindings, and they've won awards for that. So that's why I chose this particular printer. So we start with a map of Gaia, and Gaia is a fairly large place, as you can probably see. It ranges from the high-rise slums over here way in the east, all the way to Aqua out in the west. You'll notice various places if you're familiar with Era Survival, mainly the White Cross Dispatch Center, Base 9, Highway 101 and the Old Brass Mine, Crossroads, which are all very important places within the universe's lore. You'll also notice Fallout in the center here. The Diaries of a Madman expansion is a guide to Fallout in the center there. So the map is on the inside cover for easy access. For easy access on the back cover, we've got the character sheet so that you can refer to that easily and quickly at any time. So, turning into the pages, we've got obviously the team and the contents. All the pages are, of course, numbered, and we've done our best to make it so that all of this has easy access. So, immediately you can find Fallout, for example, on page 24. We go on to a few comments about how to use this book. So, part 1 is the story section of this. I refer to it as Surviving Gaia. It provides all of the information about factions, about the way it is to live in this world, locations, and even a one-page summary to get you started if you don't want to read the entire book. Followed by that, we have character creation. Obviously, there's everything that you need to create a character in there. We go on to weapons, equipment, and creatures of Gaia. So that's a bestiary that we have in there, as well as the weapons and equipment that you can have. And we've got the Era D10 rule set for Era Survival, so the full rule set for this game. And finally, we've got a section for the Game Master. So we kick off part 1 with that one-page summary, which is right here. That is a sort of a summary of everything that I, as the creator, think you need to know if you're going to play this game. And I'd just like to say hello to Adam and Douglas, who are watching. Hello! Following that, we've got factions. We cover the infected in some detail. And then we move on to Aqua, the Cult of Progression, the Defenders, the Nihilists, and each of these is broken down with about the founding and background of the sort of a general feel of the faction, where they came from. We've got the leadership and who leads this faction. Welcome, Billy. Thank you very much for watching. We've got the living conditions, recruitment, how they actually recruit into their faction. And we've got the relationships with other factions. So that will vary from faction to faction. Some get on with other people. The Nihilists, in fact, don't get on with anyone. Next, we've got the Organization of Friends, which is, that's the faction that runs City, the last remaining city. And it was founded almost 80 years ago. So, I mean, I've got a fairly extensive background for all of these. Obviously, it's nothing compared to what I'm about to show you for the Swarm in the Swarm expansion. But, you know, it's a very detailed background, and it should provide you with a lot of information. We've got Potestates, we've got the Raiders and the Runners Guild. You'll notice they're in alphabetical order for ease of reference. We've got the Sisterhood of Pyrrhus, the Swarm, and the University of Planet, and finally the Vault Hunters. Many of you might be familiar with Vault Hunters from the games we've recently been playing online, where we showed... Oh, hello, Richard. Where we showed many groups who were playing as Vault Hunters. Oh, and finally the White Cross. I'm sorry, how did I miss that? The White Cross, of course, is, again, something that's featured in several of our games, and I'm sure that you will have heard of it. After that, we cover notable locations. So we talk about what an infection zone looks like, and I've, again, referred to these in games. High zone, med zone, load zone, and clean zone. Clean zones are phenomenally rare. High zone, somewhere like Fallout, is absolutely a high zone. There are other dotted around high zones. And you can get a map from the runners to show where is safe. It's contributed to by both the runners and also the White Cross. Again, in the locations, I cover a kind of a general overview, then a history, details about the population, and then things about the law and the crimes in that area. So base 9, which is where the University of Planet is. We've got City, we've got the Crossroads, Fallout, and various other places. I'm not going to go through all these in complete detail. It gives you a wide variety of places you can go. There's Sanctuary, which is also kind of an interesting area. It's said that there's no infection there. Interesting. We move on to Life on Gaia, which is the story section of this. And we have a huge variety of stories covering, various factions and, various people's perspective on living in this world. It's a great resource for adventure seeds. It's also a great resource for... gone a bit far. It's also a great resource for showing people what it looks like and what it feels like to live within the world. And that moves us on to part 2, character creation. A picture of the original playtesters there. A few basic things you should know about character creation. What's the world like? What's the population like? What's the infection like? What's the risk of infection as you wander this world? There is a note about combat and damage. So weapons in this setting are extremely old. Everything is falling apart, and you're going to have to be very careful with not only ammunition, but also the durability of your weapon. I do a quick overview summary. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. For those people who are broadly familiar with it, or just want the very quick version for some reason, there's an overview here, and then I go into detail for each one. So we've got backgrounds, and we've actually got pages and pages of ideas for backgrounds for you. 5 pages of backgrounds, so loads of... 6 pages of backgrounds, I'm sorry. So loads of options. You've got loads and loads of choices here. From, let's have a look at one of the ones near the beginning here. We've got a runner. You could be a wise one, which was on the last page there. You could be an escapee from the Sisters of Pyrrhus or the Swarm or something. We also cover appearance. I think that's really important to make the feel of the world right. So we cover appearance in some detail and talk about what they might look like. We then move on to karma, which arguably is one of the most important things about this particular thing, this particular game. Welcome, Mac. This is one of the most important things about this particular game. You can only start with 5 kinds of karma. You can be good 2, good 1, neutral, evil 1, evil 2. And I've given them names as well, just to give you an idea, along with a brief description. This should absolutely be based on your character's backstory and what they've done in the past. We move on to quirks and hobbies. Quirks are absolutely great fun, from kleptomaniac or pyromaniac to grizzled or seen it all. You get loads of choices in here, and you can make up your own, of course, as well. We've also got a few examples of hobbies that you might choose for your character. Next, we've got a detail on the abilities, the attributes that we've got, which are the natural ability statistics: strength, intelligence, charisma, stamina, willpower, dexterity, wits, and luck. Those are all the ones on the left-hand side of the character sheet, right here. The skills are on the right, and we'll come on to those in a second. I give a description of each one and try to explain what it is that you're going to be good at if you're good at this skill. And then I move on to the skills and I do much similar. So there are 18 skills in this game. Ooh, that's 2 pages. And we spent a good long time explaining exactly what that skill is good for. There's a little more on skills in the back. I'll come to that shortly in the GM section. Specialties. So everyone gets 1 specialty on creation. You get more as you level up slowly. And all of these are sort of a special ability that you have as a character that make you slightly better than the world in general, and even the playing field a bit, because it's likely that you'll be fighting superior numbers quite a lot. Derived stats. These are pretty straightforward, but they're all sort of fabric of the world stuff. Notoriety, have people heard of you? Size. An adult size 5, a child is size 4. Health and pain, you know, how much health do you have, how much damage can you take before you go down. Initiative modifier, how fast do you react. Speed, how fast do you run. Encumbrance, how much equipment can you carry. Defense, how good are you at dodging. Damage and kill modifiers apply to weapons, which I'll get to when we get to combat rules. I've also got the gaining experience section here, so you'll see on the edge, you can get 1, 2, 3, 4 extra specialties, so only 5 specialties in total from beginning to level 20. This game is quite harsh with leveling. It doesn't give you a lot of abilities every time you level, so you're going to have to be careful out there in the world. Moving on to part 3, we've got weapons, equipment, and creatures of Gaia. So we start with the various equipment details. You can have weapon modifications. I cover various bits and pieces. This is very much at the GM's discretion. I talk about buying and selling. I talk about crafting, which is a little later on in this part. And I talk about ammunition. So ammunition, unlike in Era of the Consortium and other games, is not unlimited. It's very limited resource, and it's considered 1 tier below the weapon. Speaking of tiers, hopping in, tier 1 items are easy to come by or not very good in general. So things like injection or flash, which are provided by the White Cross to help keep people alive, or bandages, you know, which you can pretty much make from ripped up rags if you must. Gas mask, again, very easy to get hold of. Things that are sort of also level 1 are things like a rusty knife. You know, something that's not going to be very good in combat, but is actually available to you. Tier 2 is slightly better. We've got alcohol here. We've got batteries and flares, handheld flares. We've got a knife, so like a combat knife. It's kind of the basics of weapons, sort of the not free and the not easy to come by stuff. Sorry, the not free but the relatively easy to come by stuff is what I mean. Map of the infected zones. You know, I've got a price for all these things here, so you can go ahead and buy them if you want to in the game. Tier 3, we're starting to get into more interesting things. We've got bow and arrows. We've got a handgun over here. We've got a Molotov cocktail that you can make. So some of these you'll notice they've got a green bar not available at creation. That means you can't get them at creation. At creation, you're allowed to take any items up to tier 4 at the GM's discretion. And you can't purchase certain things, so you have to buy them. And in most cases, armor plates or bone claws or even Molotov cocktails, they're not available at creation. You can get ration packs, shock sticks, and so on. We move on to tier 4 now. Swords and axes. We've got makeshift flamers that you can make. We've got a magnum, which is my personal favorite weapon in Era Survival. Submachine guns, smoke grenades, night vision goggles. Things that are available pretty good. You know, tier 4 is pretty good. It's pretty apex for what you can get. Tier 5 is beyond what you're allowed to have as a starting character. So you can have an assault rifle, you can have a palm-top computer to go around playing with old technology. Moving on, we've got tier 6, which are even more powerful. These are you're very unlikely to come across these unless you come across someone who's very well equipped. Somewhere like Highway 101 might have a couple of these items. We're talking about military-grade flamethrowers, grenades, full body armor, that kind of stuff. Next, Tier 7, these are even more powerful. There may be one of these in Highway 101, or, you know, like a major Defender character may have this. Things like grenade launchers, miniguns, and so on. Finally, we've got Tier 8 items, which are basically not found anywhere. City might have a couple. You've got helicopters down in the corner here, and you're only 3 helicopters existed. I'm sorry, now only 2 helicopters exist. We'll cover that when we talk about the definitive edition, because there's a story around that. So 2 helicopters exist in the world. The White Cross owns those helicopters. You are not going to get hold of a helicopter in practical terms unless you luck out massively and find one in a vault. So moving on to crafting, there's you know, facilities required, or you know, whether it can be makeshift. And there are a list of the items that you need to get, all of which are tiered items, so you know how to get hold of them. And there's even a flowchart for crafting about how you actually go about doing that. We move on to the bestiary. So the bestiary involves 2 parts. The first part is deformities, and again, we'll come on to that again in more detail when we talk about the Infected Manual and the Definitive Edition. There are quite a few options here, actually 20 options, and we then move on to infected with stats as well. So there's a stat block down here for all of the different kinds of infected: humans, bears, burrowers, moles, if you like, bats, crones, deer, hummers. So anything warm-blooded can be infected. We also cover non-infected things which are a threat. Man-trap vines, which exist out in the forest and will just grab you and eat you. The 9-step frog, which is a poisonous frog that people try to catch and use on their weapons. Parasitic locusts. So these are the things that actually eat parasites. And they actually are completely immune to infection, of course, but they actually eat the parasites, and it's one of the best hopes for removing the infection from Gaia. We've got Phibians. They're kind of no one's really sure exactly what they are. They're probably some kind of mutation of humans, people think, but it's a very odd mutation, and there are a lot of them. So no one's really sure if maybe just one of these creatures existed and got infected and multiplied. We've got rainbow web spiders. Those are a kind of, they're used for flash making. Rats and mice, obviously, are a big threat to many people who roam Gaia. And the trapdoor ants, which are one of the most horrific things that we came up with while inventing Gaia. They literally make a trapdoor thing that's big enough for a human, and then the entire colony swarms over you and eats you. It's very unpleasant. We have wolves as the final one there. And now we're going to move on to the rules. So the rules are the basics of the rule set that you'll find in the Era D10 fundamentals. The basics are all the same. We've got some general rules that are very specific to Era survival. So we've got salvage rules. We've got durability of equipment and when it's usable and when it's not. We've got equipment repair and damage. Those are both very, very important for Era survival. We've got sleeping rough, which is another thing that's very important for Era survival. Often you'll find yourself outdoors, and you actually get a penalty when that happens. We've got luck points and bad luck points, which are common to all of the games. Next, we move on to karma. Now, I'm actually making a separate video all about karma and why it's important, but the practicalities of it are that there are cards for karma. There's also a list of... Oh, sorry, wrong page there. There's also a list of them if you don't want to get hold of the cards. I would always strongly recommend the cards. You'll see here it's Appendix 4 card list. There are 20 different kinds, so you can just roll a d20, but the cards are balanced based on the sort of the strength of the actual thing that's happening. I've actually got a set of cards here, so I'll just leap in with those. This is the tin boxed version. Oh, and you'll see that there are 2 decks of cards. There is one that's evil and one that's good. The evil cards, there's about 35 of each. The evil cards are making something bad happen to you, and the good cards make something good happen to you. Again, if you want an example of how they look used, please do check out the sessions that we've recently been recording. I think that'll be very informative for you. The Karma cards are available on the Kickstarter, both in the tin box, which I have here, which is £15. Just add it to your tier if you're backing. And also in shrink-wrapped form, so you can just add £10 and you'll get the 2 decks shrink-wrapped if you already have a box for them. I also cover Jack of all trades points, which are an important part of the neutral aspect of the karma tree. It was always very important to me that karma has a reward for being good, a reward for being evil, and a reward for being neutral, because I often feel that neutral is overlooked in game systems. So having dealt with karma, there are rules on damage, taking damage and healing that damage, on dying and surviving, on how you can survive if you do actually take a kill threshold hit. Then we move on to status effects. So the first big page here is all about infection. So I go through the life cycle of infection and talk about how you can save someone in this phase. And then once you get to a certain point in it, you can no longer save that person no matter what. We then go into many of the statuses that, again, you'll recognize from Iridy 10 Fundamentals. I'll put a link at the end of this. I'll put a link in the Facebook for Iridy 10 Fundamentals so that you guys can check it out. It's a free download. It's a free booklet that gives you the basics of the rule set. But most of these are all in there. I don't think there's anything that is not actually covered in there. We go into combat rules. So again, most of this is very similar to what's in Iridy 10 Fundamentals. We cover sneak attacks, we cover hitting and damaging and so on. We even cover vehicle-based combat and using 2 weapons. We have a specific area where we go into each type of combat. So there are 4 kinds of combat in the era games. We cover the unarmed combat, and there's a flowchart here. These 2 pages cover everything from punching something to grappling something, every single possibility that I could think of, and I've never come across a problem so far. Plus, there is an other action GM's discretion option here. There's then melee combat, hitting something with a sword or an axe, or in this case, an axe, I suppose. We've got ranged combat, which is weaponry. And we've got thrown combat, which is, throwing knives, throwing grenades, or whatever else. We've got both AoE and direct damage thrown weapons here. AoE damage has its own section, just to make sure that you follow along in the way that it needs to be resolved. And then we go straight on to the GM part. So I've got some general advice for the GM that I start with. I talk about speeding up combat and, can you drink the water? All kinds of things that the GM might want to know. This is just sort of general advice that I've given that relates to the universe and, how you gain items, or what is a wise one, or, how do you speed up combat if you're in a massive battle and you want to speed it up. I then move on to GMing era survival, and I talk for a page about how to make sure that it is survival horror, rather than turning into Western or, another genre, an action thing that's not really survival horror because you're fine. So I talk about a lot of things that you can do to help make that suspense and make that scarcity a thing that people are struggling against. I GM all of my games based on this philosophy. I then go into a huge range. You can see here there's a contents page. I go into a huge range of sessions and campaigns. I've actually done Don't Open the Package, well, a slight variation on it, and I've done the Ghosts of Westbrook during my recent sessions. So please go ahead and have a look at those if you're interested in what these are like. I think the Ghosts of Westbrook is probably the best example. Do go ahead and look at those. We've also got some short campaigns. I may well run a campaign if I get some people who want to commit for a period of time to play some games in a row. So I'm just going to flick through these sessions and campaigns. Loads of detail, as you can see. All of them have a mission briefing, a background, and then the actual the breakdown of the mission. It's the one-page format that I use in some of the later books as well. It was absolutely based on how successful this was. Now, I told you that I'd come back to skills a bit later in the GM section, and here we are. I have actually given you a bullet point list here of every single skill and why you might use it with any given attribute. Some of you might be aware that Era, Survival, and all of the Era games, there's no link between the attributes and the skills. You don't know that you'll always be rolling Strength Brawl. That's very deliberate. That's a design choice that I made. And you're able to find out some ideas of why you might use, I don't know, Strength and Stealth, for example. I've done that for all of the 18 skills, so there are 6 pages here of all of the details that I could come up with. And then I move on to a worked example. So I actually do a combat worked example, show you exactly how this works, and I devote quite a few pages to that to make sure that it's very, very clear how this works. I do all the way through combat, I do the end of combat, I do salvaging and find out whether that works, find out how that works, rather, to show people how that might all run. I move on to the appendices now, so I talk about example fumble outcomes. I think that's quite important because sometimes you don't want the weapon to break every time. You want something different. So there are a few examples there. I've got some example playable characters here, where I came up with a few concepts for you to play with. And then I've got some stats. So I've got a stat block here that shows you all of the stats for example, this is an infected one, so it's got Hummers or Bear Shamblers or, whatever else you'd like to have. And then I've got a double page of the kind of NPCs that you might run into. I've got some low-level ones, I've got some mid-level ones, and I've got some high-level ones. I already talked about the karma card list, good and evil. We've got an index, of course, in the book. I think that's really important. We've got a glossary for all of the terms that you might come across during the book and you want to see. And we've then got the contributors. So these contributors are the original Kickstarter backers who made all of this possible. I can't thank them enough. They've really brought this universe to life. And that's the core rulebook. So what I'm going to cover quickly now is I'm going to talk about the Rulebook Primer. That's a cut-down version of the core rulebook. It's got the map, it's got the one-page summary, and it goes straight into the character creation. So it's got what I consider the absolute minimum for creating characters and playing. It does not have any of the faction information, it does not have any of the story, apart from that one-page introduction that we've got. So you can use this to play the game, but you will be missing out on a lot of the flavor and the factions and the various interesting things that exist within this world. All of the expansions are compatible with this. It's actually identical character creation, just a little bit cut down in places, so the skills only take up this much space, for example. We've also got a limited number of specialties. When we talk about the equipment, again, the equipment is a very much more condensed set, and it only goes up to tier 4 items, which is all you can have when you're a created character. So you can't get anything tier 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. You can't get that as a created character, but if you try to run a game with this, you also don't have any of those stats. So it really is the basics. We've then got the rule set. We've got the rule set pretty much in full. Exactly as it is in the core rulebook. You'll notice all the flowcharts here. I've changed the layout a bit, but the fundamental content is the same. I did give a double page for the GM advice, and I gave the card list as well. But that's all I could fit in this 40-page book. It's great for a little condensed player's guide. People have used it for that and found it really helpful. But beyond that, I would always recommend the core rulebook over the Rulebook Primer for running this game. Before I move on to the Definitive Edition Rulebook, I want to talk about 2 of the expansions that we unlocked in the last Kickstarter. The first of those is the Infected Manual. So when we were going through the Pot 3 and the Bestiary, I talked briefly about how there were more kinds of infected mutations than there were shown in the core rulebook there. So I actually came up with 100 different mutations, and I wrote something up. They've all got the rules for each one, and the idea is that you can literally roll 2d10. Let's say you get 41, so your character grows a horn. Your infected character grows a horn. Some of them, there's for mutant and for shambler, and it's different for each one of them. Some of them are a lot more powerful for mutants than they are for shamblers, and some of them it makes very little difference. So this is literally just 60 examples of characters that you can have, of, what have I just said? I'm sorry, it's 100 examples of infections, infected mutations that you can add to your characters. That is this book. It is the Infected Manual. It's 26 pages long, and it offers all of that. Tales of the Outlands is a similar length. This is designed as an adventure seeds book. It's much more about the legends of the Edge of Gaia. Here we've got the Blooded Matron and the Lady of Mercy, and the different perspectives that factions have on them, because most people call it the Blooded Matron, whereas the Nihilists call it the Lady of Mercy. And so we've got a few stories here, a few of the legends. We've got some new and special and unique equipment in this book as well for entering dangerous areas. There's a tier 5 hand cannon, which is sort of an upgraded Magnum, if you like. There are motorbikes specifically. There are heavy machine guns. All kinds of things that you might want to use. We've then got adventure seeds. So I've tried to make sort of adventure seeds for things that you can do if you want to enter the Outlands and maybe be a little more on your own rather than together with so many people around. We've got here quite a few options for you, many of which you may have spotted Pozdosbo back there. Pozdosbo is one of the legends at the beginning of the book, so many of them refer to this, these various places that we've talked about in the stories. So that is the Tales of the Outlands. I'm going to come on to the Definitive Edition Rulebook now. This is a hardcover book only. It's got this sort of very striking black cover. It's 300 pages long. And it's very similar to the Core Rulebook in layout, so you'll recognize a lot of this stuff. We've got many of the similar things. We've got all of the factions again, of course. We actually have some extra locations. So we go into some detail with Aqua. We talk about the Scorched Earth Zone and the City of Light, which are areas that the Swarm has. We talk about Vault 26 and Burned Oak, which are two absolutely brilliant locations that I was able to add because my page count relaxed for the Definitive Edition. We move on to the Life on Gaia section, but we've also got a lot more of a lot more stories in here. It's a significantly longer section. We've added stories for pretty much all of the factions. And we've also got the original content as well. So there's a lot more stuff. There's a lot more stuff that you can base ideas and adventures on, and a lot more explorations of the various areas. Along with, I mentioned, excuse me, sorry. I mentioned the helicopter being destroyed. The story of that is actually within here. A Moment of Inattention. Here it is. And it's the story of how a particular character accidentally blew up the helicopter. We go through and you know, there are various new stories. We also added Tales of the Outland in here, and that's why I went into the expansions before I did this, because the full content of Tales of the Outlands is in this book. That's the story part, but if you go later into the GM section, then you'll see the rest. Character creation is broadly unchanged. There are a few more quirks and hobbies, and they've been re-edited slightly, but it's broadly unchanged. The equipment is similar. there are a few more pieces of equipment, but for the most part, it's a very similar list. We do, of course, have the Tales of the Outlands equipment as promised. Crafting, and then we move on to the abilities. So the entire Infected manual, all 100 abilities, are right here in this book, where it used to be 20. I should say those 20 that were in the Core Rulebook are indeed part of this list. We move on to the Bestiary, which is similar to before. Although we've actually added a couple of extra things. There's the Vandal there that you won't have seen before. I'm trying to remember what the other... the Ravager is also brand new for the Era Survival Definitive Edition. So there are a few extra options for you. The rules are basically unchanged. We did a re-edit. We relaid out a few bits and pieces, but generally they're pretty similar. The GM advice, includes all of the things that were in there before. It includes all of the sessions that we mentioned before, as well as the adventure seeds for the Tales of the Outlands. The example skill uses are still there, of course. The worked example still included, and the example playable characters, the stats, and the card list. So now we've got two contributors page because we actually had the Universe of Expansions Kickstarter, and this is where these individuals were immortalized for their contribution to what we were able to bring to life for Era Survival. The glossary and the indices, obviously the index is a little longer this time, and we've now got the character sheet on the back cover once again. So that's the Era Survival Definitive Edition. I think that this is the best example of Era Survival. You can absolutely play with the Core Rulebook. I included those two expansions because one of the reviewers said that they felt that, these weren't expansions. They were really part of the core game, and really they enhanced your playstyle so much that they were worth having as part of the core game. And that's why I decided to include those two expansions within the Definitive Edition Rulebook. There's one more existing expansion to talk about, and this is going to be of interest when I come on to talking about the upcoming expansions, and that is the Swarm. So you'll notice here that I've modified the map to give you an idea of what Swarm territory is. The Swarm is a group who go around burning everything in order to try and prevent the spread of infection. And I've got a 2-page, well, 1.5-page summary here of what the Swarm is and where it came from. I've also got the way in which you can be a character related to the Swarm. So drones, I suggest you don't play as those. But you can be an escapee, you can be an escaped drone, and then you move on to the various tiers of Swarm personnel. So there's the Absediary, who are the brainwashers. They make sure that people stay in line. There's the administrators. They manage the logistics and everything. The agents, which infiltrate, obviously, other settlements and find out what threats might be to the Swarm. The artificers, who build the Swarm technology. Swarm has some of the best technology there is on Gaia. The Ashen, who lead the drones in battle. And I'm going to come on to it in a minute, but there are squad combat rules because of the Ashen. I figure you may want to play an Ashen and lead some drones. And finally, we've got the Alphas, who are the guys in charge. We refer to the Aleph. I wouldn't consider her playable, really. She is an individual who now has inherited the Swarm, and much of the reason that the Swarm is so aggressive and expansionist is because of her. You may have noticed that, I don't know how well you see that on the thing, all of the characters are bald. They electrolyze the hairs from their head. The agents actually wear wigs and such as a disguise. It's a sign that you're part of the Swarm, and it's one of the things that makes them all identical in their minds. So there are some lovely little details about the setting. The Scorched Earth Zone and the City of Light are featured in here, of course. But we also feature several other locations that you can visit, such as Camp Fortitude and Camp Resolution, which are both locations that the Swarm has a significant presence. Um, I did do some stories about the Swarm with Jennifer, who was the lead writer on the Core Rulebook. We made sort of as many as we could to show you what it's like to be in the Swarm. We go on to the character creation section. So what I like to do in expansions is I like to give extra options. So here are the backgrounds for the Obsediary, the Administrator, the Agent, the Artificer, the Ashen, and the Alpha, if you want to play as an Alpha. And they're all background details, and it'll give you a lot of information about what you can expect from your life as a day-to-day. I cover the appearance and the thing that I just said about the electrolyzed heads. And I talk about karma. So karma for the Swarm specifically, that no one's born a member of the Swarm, so you could be pretty much anyone. If you stay as the Swarm for a long time, it's very likely you gradually move more and more towards evil karma. We've got some specific quirks for the Swarm, from slavishly loyal to on the edge of leaving. And we've got some very unique specialties for each of the 5 things you can be part of. So Absediaries, they have brainwashing techniques. They can program characters to do actions. Administrators, you know, they gain +1 defense. They've been taught the basics of combat and they know how to stay out of trouble. Agents, you know, they have stealth status. They have the ability to get out of sight whenever in combat. And you gain stealth status with 3 successes. Artificers, they're really good at repairing weapons in the field. So 3 successes on any fixing roll will always repair all durability. If you're an Ashen, you gain +2 dice on all instruction rolls for drones or specials in combat, because you're the combat experts. The Swarm also has unique technology. The Swarm stuff is generally a little bit better at damaging, a little worse at killing. Because they mostly want to take people alive and convert them to be part of the Swarm. We've got some communications units and various other bits and pieces. And we move on to squad combat that I mentioned before. So how you actually do that, how that works. I've got some general advice similar to the Core Rulebook or the Definitive Edition Rulebook about how you actually run a game with the Swarm and how that works. Particularly, you know, they're horrifying. You know, it's different what a member of the Swarm after conditioning would find horrifying to what a normal individual would find horrifying. So they take willpower checks at weird times. Sessions and campaigns. I mean, it's an absolute must with Era Survival and any of our games that we give you loads and loads of sessions and campaigns to play with. There are so many options here. You can do pretty much whatever you like. And we finish up, as always, with the character sheet on the inside cover. And that's the Swarm expansion. It also comes in hardback, which is a nice black book that goes with the Definitive Edition Rulebook. It's got all of the same content. There's no actual difference between the content there. So that's all of the existing expansions that we've done to date. As I'm sure you can imagine, we are expecting to deliver a similar level of quality in the new Kickstarter. We have already spoken quite extensively about how we're going to do the Aqua sourcebook. I've talked about new card decks, and I've talked about Diaries of a Madman and Encounters en Route. So Encounters en Route, for example, I would like it to be relatively similar to the Infected Manual in that you have 100 options and each one gives you something, and you can just roll 2d10 and choose which option that you'd like to have. The Aqua sourcebook will be really very similar to the Swarm sourcebook layout. I want to be giving sort of the same level of support and interesting content to people who are working with Aqua as they get with the Swarm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this live stream here for now. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll be more than happy to answer. And I will see you again very soon. Please I will also put in the Era D10 Fundamentals link, as promised, and also the Kickstarter link. Please check out the Kickstarter if you like the look of these books. We're reliant on your support to make this amazing dream a reality. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for watching.